So why should we be interested in learning about techniques for efficient usage of LLMs? Let's take a look at 3 ways to use a computer. So we could completely fail to use any potential of the computer by using it as a pillow. We could use only a tiny portion of its full potential by applying it only to edit documents such as Word documents or Excel spreadsheets, or we could take advantage of its full potential by running complex simulations on it, such as climate modeling simulations to predict the weather, extreme weather events, and future climate change, or protein folding simulations that facilitate discovery of better drugs. So the question is, what utility we would like to gain from our interactions with LLMs? And only by using techniques for efficient communication with LLMs can we boost our level of interaction with them from this level to this one. Well, in this little tutorial, I want to discuss a technique for interactions with LLMs that is, from my experience, one of the most potent and powerful techniques for interactions with LLMs, and I personally use it all the time. It is called the iterative refinement technique. However, before I discuss iterative refinement, it is necessary to introduce the basic building block of this technique, which is single response refinement. All right, so before I introduce the iterative refinement technique, I want to discuss another technique which is the basic building block of iterative refinement, and it is called single response refinement. The situation in which this technique can be applied is when the user has entered some initial prompt to the LLM generated some response, and now the user read the response and felt that he would like to improve it in a certain way. All right, so our first type of refinement is called precision refinement on the complete response, and has the purpose to increase the level of detail of the response. Here in the example that we see on the screen, we see that it can be implemented in various forms. Either a precision refinement in the most general form, like in version 1, or it can come in a more specific form where we ask the LLM not simply to make the response more detailed, but we also give it guidance in what way to detailize the response. All right, so let's learn about a different type of refinement. This is a refinement technique that I find extremely useful, and I think I'm using it in almost all of my conversations with LLMs. It's called precision refinement on part of the response, and as the name indicates, its purpose is to elaborate on a certain aspect of the response. Let's take a look at the example on the screen. Here, the initial prompt is, tell me about the establishment of the State of Israel. And I have listed 3 versions of refinement prompt here. For example, in the first version, I want the LLM to elaborate on the role of the Zionist movement in the establishment of the State of Israel. As is well known, one example sheds more light than 100 definitions. So in the next type of refinement that we're going to learn about, the purpose is to enrich the LLM's response with some examples. Here on the screen we have a few versions of such a refinement prompt. Note that in each of the version we specified the amount of examples that we would like to generate. The purpose of the next refinement technique that we're going to learn about is to impose some constraint on the LLM's response, where it should be noted that the constraint can be really any type of limitation. In the examples that we see on the screen, we find 2 types of constraints. Here in refinement prompt version 1 and version 2, the constraint is about the length of the response. In version 3, it's about using formulas, or to be more precise, not using formulas. But once again, these are just some example prompts, and really the constraint can be anything at all. The next refinement types that we are going to learn about is called format refinement, and as the name indicates, its purpose is to refine or modify the format of the response. On the screen we see 2 versions of a format refinement prompt. I personally use the first version a lot, especially when learning about new topics, because it allows me to extract the major points related to a certain topic in such a way that I can grasp them very quickly. The last type of refinement that I would like to mention is complexity adjustment, and the purpose of this refinement type is to adjust the difficulty level to the user's background. So here on the screen we see 2 versions of a complexity refinement prompt. In general, I would say that this type of refinement is most useful when learning about new topics. Alright, so I would love to conclude this discussion of single response refinement with two remarks. First of all, there exists an endless diversity of refinement types. The ones that I have picked here are those which I personally use a lot, find them very beneficial and rather universal, meaning that they can and should be applied in various types of human LLM interactions, whether the interaction is about learning about a new topic or generating content or solving some problem. Secondly, you may have noticed that most of my refinement prompts start with the expression modify it, and I would strongly encourage you to do it this way as well, because this expression really has a double purpose. First of all, it signals to the LLM that it should refer to its last response and therefore avoid any possible confusion. And moreover, it does the same to the reader. So when the potential reader of the conversation sees this expression, he knows right away that here the user is asking the LLM to modify its last response. Well, as we have finished discussing single response refinement, we are ready to move on to the main topic of this tutorial, which is the iterative refinement technique. So, what is the main idea behind this technique? It is very simple. This technique is basically about successive application of single response refinement. So we are applying single response refinement over and over again, and ideally with each refinement the response will become a little bit better, and we continue to refine the response until we obtain a result that is sufficiently satisfying. One of the tremendous strengths of this technique, which I believe should be mentioned before we take a look at some examples, is that iterative refinement is a universal technique, which means that it can be applied to various types of human LLM interactions, whether the interaction is about learning about some topic or about generating content or about solving a problem. Well, at this point, the technique may still look a little bit abstract, but I'm sure that as soon as we see some examples, we will understand how the technique works in practice. So let's move on to our first example. Just a quick remark before we move on to the examples. In order to make the conversations a little bit less formal and a bit more fun, I will use the name Daniel for the human and the name Sage for the LLM. Alright, so let's take a look at our first example, in which Daniel wants to learn about some topic. And here the topic is AI in education. So let's take a look at the first cycle of the conversation. Here we see that Daniel starts the conversation with a simple and straightforward prompt where he asks Sage to tell him about AI in education, and Sage responds by providing a compact and general description of this topic. Alright, so let's move on to the first refinement iteration. If we take a look at Daniel's prompt here, we see immediately that the type of refinement that we find here is precision refinement, in which Daniel asks Sage to elaborate on a specific aspect of the broader topic. And taking a look at Sage's response, we see that this is exactly what Sage did by listing 3 types of learning systems that enable personalized learning. Alright, so now let's move on to the next refinement iteration. So here, if we take a look at Daniel's prompt, we see immediately that here we have a refinement for format improvement, in which Daniel asks Sage to format his previous response into a table with the 2 columns AI application and description. And if we take a look at Sage's response, we see that he did exactly what he was asked to do by providing such a table. Well, so now let's move on to the next refinement cycle. Here, if we take a look at Daniel's prompt, we see immediately that the type of refinement that he uses here is refinement for breadth, which means that he wants to widen his perspective on the topic by asking for 2 additional examples. And taking a look at Sage's response, we see that here Sage displayed a larger table that includes 2 more examples here at the bottom: AI powered chatbots and predictive analytics. In this example, I would like to demonstrate how a person can take advantage of the iterative refinement technique in order to deepen his understanding of a particular aspect of some topic. So here in this example, the topic is the causes of World War II, and the specific aspect that Daniel is interested in is the role of the Allies. Alright, so let's go over the conversation. So here we see that Daniel starts the interaction with a simple and straightforward prompt in which he asks Sage to explain the main causes that led to World War II, focusing on the role of the Allies. And if we take a look at Sage's response, we see that he did what he was asked to. He's listing the major policies and events that were causal to World War II, such as the Treaty of Versailles, the Great Depression, and the appeasement policy by Britain and France. Now, since Daniel is primarily interested in the causal role of Britain and France with relation to World War II, in the first refinement iteration, he prompts Sage to direct his attention towards the practices and policies of these two allies. And as we see here, indeed, Sage does what he was asked to do by mentioning the major events and policies that were related to Britain and France, such as appeasement policy, diplomatic caution, and the rearmament of Germany that was allowed to take place by these two allies. I believe that this iteration of the conversation is particularly interesting because here Daniel is not asking a simple questions that can be answered via Google or Wikipedia, such as questions about events or even cause and effect relationships, but here he is asking about understanding the thinking process of the leaders of these two countries. So in particular, he's asking how it was possible that they did not expect that their appeasement policies would facilitate further German expansion. And here we see that in his answer, Sage related to the question by mentioning some of the main factors which caused the leaders to disregard this danger, such as memories of World War I, economic constraints on the side of America and Britain, such as the Great Depression, and the hope that Hitler would be satisfied. After having explored the causal role of the European allies, in the third and last refinement iteration, Daniel would like to broaden his perspective and to learn about the causal role of the United States. So he prompts Sage, let's shift focus towards the USA, list some major events and policies that might have facilitated the USA's involvement in the war. And if we take a look at Sage's response, we see that he listed some of the major events and policies related to the causal role of the USA, such as the cash and carry policy of 1939, the Lend-Lease Act of 1941, and the attack on Pearl Harbor. So, in this example, I want to demonstrate how to use the iterative refinement technique for content generation. And in this example, the content is going to be a professional email, or to be more precise, an email that is a project update for a software project. And I want to note here that in this example, we are going to see the full power of the technique, as we're going to observe how the email improves from one iteration to the next, and the tremendous qualitative difference between the final version and the initial version. Okay, so let's go over the conversation. So Daniel starts with a compact and straightforward prompt. Write a project update email for my mobile app development project. And Sage responds by outputting a concise project update. Note that this little text is really compact and lacks detail. Now, in the first refinement iteration, Daniel addresses this issue by prompting, expand the email to include details about the app's purpose, milestones, and challenges. And Sage generates a response that is a more detailed version of the email, as we see on the screen. Also note that this version suffers from a different problem, which is a language that is too casual. We can see it clearly in this sentence that says, that said, we've run into a couple of issues, which is clearly a very casual formulation. Now, in the next iteration, Daniel deals with this problem by prompting Sage to make the email more formal and appropriate for a manager. And as we see, the new version of the email that Sage generates looks more formal. It is sufficient to take a look at this sentence here that is selected, which now has a much more formal style than the version that we saw in the previous email. So in the next iteration, Daniel wants to improve the structure of the email. So he asks Sage to reorganize it and to include 3 sections: milestones achieved, challenges, and next steps. Now, if we take a look at the new version of the email generated by Sage, we see here that it did what it was asked to do. Here we see our 3 sections, and moreover, we also observe that Sage added a few nice icons even without being asked, which makes the email even more stylish and improves the clarity. So now, as Daniel takes a closer look at this version, he notices that in the current challenges section, each challenge is described in a very short form, and he believes that it might be difficult for the project manager to understand what exactly is the problem. So he decides to go for another iteration where he prompts Sage to make the challenges section more detailed by briefly explaining the impact of each challenge. Now, if we take a look at the final version of the email, we see that indeed Sage did what he was asked to do. So here we see that each of the challenges is described in a much more detailed way than in the previous version. Now, after having demonstrated the complete example, I just would like to reiterate something that I already mentioned in the beginning, namely the tremendous power of the iterative refinement technique. If we simply compare this final version here with the initial version of the emails that we see here, so it's difficult not to notice the tremendous improvement that we obtained in terms of style, structure, detail, and aesthetics.